Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the panel entitled Communications and Media in Wartime. My name is Kristina Potapova. I'm a PhD candidate at the SSEES, and I will be chairing the second panel today. So we started the Baltic Symposium with the discussion how the architecture of security has changed since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And during the second panel, I would like to focus on how foreign information manipulations and interference, including disinformation, have been used to manipulate foreign audiences in wartime. But I also want to that our speakers will focus on the main question: how Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania and also the European Union have addressed disinformation and information manipulation threats. And to answer these questions, I'm honored to introduce you three excellent speakers from all three Baltic countries. Our first speaker is Dr. Mantas Martišius, Associate Professor at Vilnius University. Our second speaker is Viktors Makarovs, First Envoy in Digital Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. And our third speaker is Siim Kumpas, Policy Officer at the European External Action Service. So all speakers have fascinating experience in addressing disinformation in the three Baltic countries and also at the European Union level. So I suggest that each speaker will give a short presentation, and after that we will have a 30 minutes of a Q&A session. And I would like to start with Mantas. So Mantas, please tell us more about Lithuania's approach to address disinformation and information manipulation threats.
Thank you. Hello. Because the question is Lithuania approach, so simple answer will be like this. Lithuania understood it quite long ago, but for Russian, media is not media as a tool for spreading information, opinions, and so on, but as well as a tool for manipulation and having a political effect upon foreign nations. What we have to understand, but in Russia, after the collapse of USSR, we've been in, at least in political and communication science, the notion that partly collapse of USSR was due to the lack of belief that USSR as empire can prevail and can continue. And there have been written huge tons of papers that actually expressed the idea that if we've been able and more successful in information management, we could be still a big empire and we couldn't avoid the collapse of USSR. Now we are in the middle of a Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and I would like to, my short speech have three theses, which actually I wanted to convey to you. But then in the Q&A session, if you will have some questions to explain me to what I want to say, I'll be glad to do it. First of all, we have to understand that media during the military conflicts, they are in an information war and in the, let's say, business of perception of reality. And as far as you go from front line, the less media is involved. The more you are closer to front line, the more media is involved in shaping reality, consolidating the public support towards the war. Hence, we have here one huge problem. More you are involved in this perception of reality, more the media is biased and more and less accurate. You know, in UK intelligence, we claim that their reports have 50–60% of accuracy. And we have to understand that MI6, they possess satellites, spies, other, let's say, information tools, and we claim that still there are there can be some inaccurate assessment of the situation. Media do not have the same abilities and the tools to approach approach to information, approach on the field what's happening, and to portray objectively portray what's going on. And hence we have a problem that if we are not accurate, but the public use that media, and when the public use the media, they force politicians to start to talk in suggested vocabulary of media agenda vocabulary, and the politicians starting to press certain actions which actually not always come from accurate situation, resolvent. The second thing that we have to, my second thesis about Russian media. For a long period of time, Russian media for 15 years tried to build a huge media empire within Russia, outside Russia, and abroad. But after invading in Ukraine, what we see that this is now, this media empire is damaged good, in the sense that a lot of their outlets, media programs have been shut down due to due to political decisions, due to the sanctions. So it's for them very hard to operate within European Union and in other areas. But the Russian media very now tries somehow concentrate and consolidate the power within Russia. First of all, what we wanted to do is to force public still not a price against this regime. Are we successful? On one hand, yes. On one hand, yes, because we do not see a huge protest within Russia. But on the second hand, we have to understand that there is a huge punitive mechanism. And when you go outside Russian towns with a billboard, stop the war, and you can be in prison for quite long, this is discourage you to do this. And this is the question, what's come first? Is the media so powerful? Is Russian propaganda so powerful? Or actually the punishment mechanism is so powerful that we can't precisely evaluate how good that Russian media is. The second thing, a lot of Russian media journalists, media outlets who opposed Putin fled, and some of them are now stationed in Vilnius, capital of Lithuania, and try to broadcast from Vilnius to Russia to present alternative points of view on what's happening. Here we have two huge problems. One problem is this, that, you know, first of all, in the Russian audience, they have to have, let's say, need for alternative sources. And this need not always comes very easily. It takes time. And sometimes half a year, and even 2 years is not sufficient time. So it can, this alternative sources to achieve more potential, more to grab the wider audience, we will have we have to give them additional time. Another big issue is actually that the platform on which we operate is YouTube. YouTube is one alternative, let's say, window who still operates within Russia. But it's most probably this year it will be shut down. We will shut down YouTube. Why we didn't it previously? It's due to the fact that we do not have Russians their own platforms who can sustain the same volume of content and the same traffic. But we're investing very heavily. I don't know how of you are familiar with this, but now we are VK video. VK is Contact, is Russian YouTube, Russian Facebook. So now VK can support huge volume of video content. But when we try trying to develop Route and when we will do this, the second thing what we'll do, we will shut down YouTube. And after that, all free world will have a problem to approach ordinary Russians and to present our point of view, because it will be we will be lacking of technical tools how to overcome those technical barriers, and this is very, let's say, challenging issue. And the last thing that I would like to say about propaganda: eventually the war will over. Eventually, and I hope that Ukraine will prevail, but we have to understand one thing. What this disinformation that's coming from Russia, this, let's say, hate speech and so on and so forth, was closed due to political decisions. But then, after the war, those decisions will be lifted. And this propaganda machine is growing out of a freedom of speech round. In 60s, 70s, before the internet, before penetration of satellite television and new technologies, there's been agreement how we should regard flow of information. And this is written in a very favorable for spread of information, but we shouldn't have any obstacles to stop or to prevent flow of information. But if you are vigilant, what you need to do, just to read the book, find the loops, and try to exploit them. And saying what you are spreading is not disinformation, is not false news, but actually different opinion than alternative reality or other point of view. And due to the fact that a lot of media, of course, in London, it's a little bit difficult to talk because it happens so that English is now franco lingua, and if you operate in London, you can have viewers all over the world. But in the rest of the world, which actually is, we cannot afford to have, let's say, an audience in all over the world due to the language barriers. The media is facing huge problems, especially problems of financing, of sustainability. And hence, will become certain groups of agents from countries who will say, we will pay for our content. We will provide you content. This content will maybe engage you in different ways, but as well, with that content, we will provide our message, our political message. Maybe at the beginning, little by little, but then we will try to persuade and influence the public. And unfortunately, it seems that nobody of us wanted to change the ground rules. And because as to change them is quite difficult, you have to have agreement upon such states as Russia and China, and it's unforeseeable for foreseeable future. It seems that we will not agree upon to go for re-examining freedom of speech ideas and freedom of speech regulation. It means that the propaganda disinformation stick here for a long time. So with this, we will have to live, not just this war, but after the war. Thank you very much.
Mantas, and your positive note at the end. I suggest we move to the second presentation. Viktors, please, could you please tell us more about Latvian government approach to address disinformation, and if you could reflect also on similarities and differences with Lithuania's approach, what Mantas has just said, especially on Russian media in Latvia. As we know, there is a large Russian-speaking minority, and it would be interesting to hear from you.
I'll come. Thank you. Good question. I'll come to that, and perhaps we can have a discussion on this last point. For me, comparing the Latvian approach to the one of Lithuanians and Estonians would be, unfortunately, to say we recognize the problem simultaneously, but the Estonians and Lithuanians ran faster. But all of us ran faster than the European Union. When we came to Brussels in 2014 to sound the alarm bells, there wasn't really much interest in discussing this. People said, it's your problem. Yeah, because you have these Russian speakers, you have reason to be concerned. Us, not so much. Things have changed. But Kristina, you posed the question for us in an email exchange. What has changed in our approach since the Russian invasion of Ukraine? And of course, my first reaction is, okay, so I would have to talk about what has changed over the last year, because what has changed, right? But the right way to start would be in 2014. But on the other hand, 2014, no awareness of the problem, no tools to deal with that, completely different world now. It's actually much more interesting to look at what happened, what changed and what didn't change over the last year, and also how our thinking on disinformation might develop in the future. So I'll make a couple of quick points because I think we're being short on time, and I'll really try to keep to 10 minutes. So what has not changed over the last year? The source and level of threat. We now clearly see, all of us, that Russia is indeed a major disinformation and propaganda actor. But at the same time, we see that it doesn't necessarily always act very purposefully, and it doesn't necessarily always do all things at once, and definitely it doesn't always achieve its goals. I would say that Russian disinformation and propaganda impact on Latvia, colleagues can speak to the situation of their countries. It's a constant drumbeat. It's an opportunistic approach because there are segments of the population who are vulnerable to messaging by the Russian government. It's a constant problem, but it's a shall we say, sandboxed vulnerability. There is a segment that is susceptible to Russian manipulation, but at the same time, we have seen how this segment has actually been diminishing. One of the important consequences of the blatancy with which Russia attacked Ukraine, or shall I say, launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has been it has been losing support. It has been losing people in the Russian-speaking communities in Latvia, I presume same in other countries, that tend to sympathize with Russia simply because it's the home of their culture and language. Among the Russian speakers in Latvia, Russia has definitely not grown its share of support. It has lost it significantly. Now, so this is basically what we have been dealing with. We have been introducing gradually policies that focus on investing more in monitoring and analysis, better stratcoms. Even more importantly, I would say we discovered that strong media systems are really a key to building resilience. Media literacy has its role, but over the long term, it's not something that I would prescribe against an acute disinformation problem. And we also discovered that this is something that has to be based on a whole of society approach. The government alone could not deal effectively with disinformation. You need civil society engaging in that, sometimes being critical of the government, and you need the media to play their role. And this is something I would say where Latvia has been extremely successful. Latvian independent media have really felt it's their responsibility to raise awareness and also explain things to people, sometimes much better than the government will do, sorry to say, or maybe it's a natural thing. What's new? Well, the focus has changed. in the West, and I would say, in most countries that take Ukraine as an important issue, Russian propaganda invested its credibility and lost it. This is important. The downer here is that in the middle ground countries, sometimes called the global South, Russia has been increasingly investing its political capital and has been investing media influence, and it has been gaining. So this is one important thing that we realized over the last year. On the positive side, I think we are now assuming a more vigorous approach to dealing with the Russian propaganda actors. And here I come to the issue of, again, media and Russian media influence in Latvia. Latvia was one of the first countries where in the EU where the Russian Kremlin-supported media disappeared one by one. So by the beginning of March last year, there was practically none of the big electronic media controlled by the Russian government. Interestingly, the EU has also been taking a much more strict approach to Russian media presence in Europe. As you may know, the EU sanctioned 5 of the most important Russian media outlets, including RT, Sputnik, and also 3 of those broadcasting in the Russian language, which is new for the EU. And these sanctions, by the way, have been taken to court. So there is really an interesting situation there. And I would say the third interesting thing that we've been looking at is the third battlefield. So the first battlefield against Russian disinformation is in the West, where I would say that we overall have been more or less successful. The second one is the global one with the middle ground countries, where Russia, I think, so far has been more successful than we would like it to be in pushing its own message, basically saying it's a conflict, both sides are to blame, and in the end it's NATO and the US fault, and so on and so on. But the third battlefield is really interesting, where I don't have too many answers for you, but there are questions. That's Russia itself. Do we even want to message the people of Russia? Do we want to try to convey to them that what their government is engaging with with their consent is a war and it's a crime? Do we want to say something else? Do we want to support independent Russian media and civil society because they might potentially contribute to change in the future, to creating a different Russia that is less threatening to its neighbors? Open question. I hope we can discuss that. Now, to finalize very quickly, I would also like to touch upon some things that we need to think about looking into the future. Because apart from consolidating our policies to counter disinformation, which is a well-developed field, there is no magic in it anymore, and you need to be very specific today when you discuss disinformation. Apart from doing that and investing more in that, and also learning to implement the Digital Services Act, which for the 3 EU member states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, is a key instrument to fight disinformation on online platforms. I think there is need to have a deeper debate about the phenomenon of disinformation or information manipulation for several reasons. First of all, we now see very clearly that disinformation, as we used to call it, it's not a disease, it's a symptom of various ailments or problems and challenges in our societies. because our societies are going through a rough period of realignment of political parties, because there is dissatisfaction with the way globalization or transition to democracy in our countries has changed the socioeconomic structure, there is a lot of dissatisfaction that feeds the need for a message that is not necessarily true, but probably reconfirms my identity, my sense of dignity, and gives me hope and a better understanding of the world. So that's the real problem here. That says I have 1 minute left. The second reason is that when we try to describe disinformation, it doesn't even work as a concept, because it's been used, unfortunately, to cover all kinds of things, beginning with your grandmother sending you, unfortunately, false advice about treating cold, like drink more C vitamin. Now, it doesn't work. So it's misinformation. It's proven it doesn't work, but it's quite innocent. If you take C vitamin, it will not harm you at certain doses. But it ends with, on the spectrum, it ends with countries like Russia, but not only Russia anymore, holding people back from taking the COVID vaccine, which results in actual deaths of actual people. If you ask me, at which point did Russian disinformation become lethal in Latvia, I would say that's COVID. They pushed disinformation about vaccines. There are real people in Latvia, if not in my family, then in others, who actually did not get vaccinated because they received that message. And some of these people died. So there is a lot, and it doesn't make any sense to lump it under one concept. Siim, I trust, will talk specifically about foreign information manipulation and interference. But again, I think there is a lot of theoretical discussions to have. And my very last point about why we should, why we are going to have to reconsider these phenomena is technological disruption. Russia has not been using the artificial intelligence powered technologies. Russia is not using ChatGPT, but the next adversary will. And we are today not prepared to face that challenge. Something to think about. Thank you.
Many thanks, Viktor. I like that you already started to discuss the concept of disinformation and mentioned also for information manipulation interference. This is actually the concept that the European External Action Service has developed, and Siim will tell us more about it. So, Siim, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Siim. I'm from Estonia. Used to work for the government office at the Strategic Communications Department before they sent me away for a couple of years to work in Brussels for some reasons. And I work at a small team called the East Stratcom Task Force. And so thinking about the whole topic of today and this panel here, if it wasn't for Russia's aggression against Ukraine back in 2014, I wouldn't be here quite literally, because the only reason why the team, as it was back then, only one small task force was set up, was as a direct response to Russia's war in Ukraine back in 2014. We've grown from a small task force to a full-fledged division, 50 or so people strong. But I'm not gonna stop on the organizational nitty-gritty too much. A couple of points. So Viktors already segued me into the whole foreign information manipulation and interference concept that we work with. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I will use FIMI for short. And why we've, I will stop there for a moment just to frame the picture. I will also leave a small timer. Is that disinformation is, while it was good for a period to understand what's the whole problem about, it is fairly limiting if we talk specifically about how states use information as a tool on an industrial level. Because disinformation, if you allow me an analogy, it's only kind of the bullet, it's the payload that hits someone, and in worst cases it causes harm. The harm can be different, but there is also a shooter, there's a gun, there's a whole ecosystem around it, there's someone who stole that gun, so on and so forth. And this is why we, over the past few years, at the External Action Service, have kind of pivoted from this content first way of thinking about the problem. So what is true, what is false, is this disinformation, is this misinformation, to what we call behavior first. So we now tend to first look at what is the overall deceptive, manipulative behavior that the Kremlin, but also CCP and some other entities use to deceive people, again, on an industrial scale. It doesn't mean that we don't look at the content at all. We do, because this is in the end like the final mile of the whole process. But we look at other things as well. I think the strength in this behavior first approach that we have to framing the whole problem and then analyzing the problem and designing responses to the problem is that it's first much more objective, because instead of trying to nail down what is truth or which narrative is better than the other, we look at manipulative behavior. And while anyone can say that they love Putin and hate Ukraine, that's fine. We live in democratic societies. You can do that. But if there is a machinery behind it that is trying to amplify that opinion, then we have a problem. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to show that there are forces in play that use a bunch of different manipulative techniques to push these narratives, whatever these narratives be. These narratives can be disinformation in the traditional sense, i.e. they're deceptive and they're knowingly created, but they can also be true pieces of information, but used in a deceptive way. And secondly, I think when we frame the whole discussion around manipulative behavior rather than the notion of truth, we are kind of bound to come up with much more democratic responses. We are much more free to drive away the discussion from but how does this go against, or are you going against different fundamental freedoms in trying to address this? So when you sanction or close off channels, what have you, I think when we again look at the behavior, people would agree that deceptive, manipulative behavior is something we should tackle. I quite like how the Australians have drawn a difference between influence and interference. I think and the way they see it is influence is something we all do. All governments do influence, soft power, public diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and that's good as long as it's open, transparent, and lawful. But then you have interference, which is covert, coercive, and yeah, under the radar. And I think we should worry less about influence and when we talk about Russia's soft power, I don't think there is much left, but there are some remains probably in some parts of the world. There we do need better communications, better strategic communications, if you will. But if you look at the interference part, there we need a whole new set of tools to address the problem. The way we've addressed this on the EU level is we see 4 pillars to how we can work against it. So first, it's always about situational awareness and making sense of what they're doing, but only not just to raise awareness, because I think there we are on a fairly good spot by now. Not ideal. There are still audiences we need to convince that Russia is committing the atrocities they are committing, but it's much better compared to 2014. But we also need monitoring and analysis to document what they're doing in terms of accountability. We also ICC's arrest warrant for Putin, but in order to show the world, show the courts that what they're doing is in effect criminal, we need proof of these actions, and we need to, so yeah, again, monitoring is not just for these nerdy analysts working to make sense of the problem. It's something we need to bring better accountability at one point. Secondly, a big chunk of what we do is about raising resilience. This would include strategic communications, but it would also include media and information literacy. I am a very strong believer in that. The powers of media literacy are limited, but I think there is much more to gain from that if we take it seriously and ingrain it within our education systems. Next to reading, writing, and arithmetics, I do believe that information literacy in the broader sense should be the fourth kind of fundamental pillar of our education systems. So thirdly, we have what the EU can do. When it comes to tackling Russia's information manipulation, I think all our member states have to pull most of the weight, but there are some things the EU can do as a whole. One of them is EU-wide legislation, and Viktor has already mentioned the DSA, the Digital Services Act, which is a much broader thing and kind of regulates digital markets and services as such, but the documents do include parts that are relevant to what we do here, and they will make social media platforms more accountable, more transparent, and more cooperative by force. Thirdly or fourthly, one of the big chunks we work on, being the foreign arm basically of the EU, is diplomatic responses. We can call out Russia's wrongdoings. We have been much more vocal in doing that ever since last February. The EU has taken, I think, a fairly strong position and stance and is not mincing their words that much anymore. And secondly, we have the power of sanctions. And again, Viktor's mentioned it briefly. By now, we have sanctioned 9 Russian outlets. And on top of that, roughly around 20 individuals who are instrumental in the whole information manipulation machinery, people from their high public officials to media workers, quote unquote. And I do not want to call it media, I would call it Russian outlets. And again, does sanctioning Russian outlets have an immediate effect in terms of how Russian disinformation and information manipulation reach EU audiences? Yes, but it's limited. But I do think there is a very strong symbolic sense in that. And even a couple of days before our top leaders announced that EU will sanction a number of Russian outlets, if anyone had asked me, I would have said it's impossible. The thinking is just not there, despite that the Baltic countries and a few others had been pushing for this for some time. But I did not see this coming. And then the news broke, obviously, and well, we've come a long way since then. So I think this is another thing, looking at internally on the EU level, shows how much, and this was touched upon in the last panel as well, that EU really has evolved quite a bit over the past 12 months. I will stop here for the introduction and let's carry on in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Siim. I have one remark and 2 questions. So first of all, I think it's fascinating that the EEAS has developed on also methodological framework for female rights analysis. I have also your report here, I'll advertise. And I have several copies. If someone wants, please come after Q&A session. I also have one follow-up, actually, question from Viktor's presentation that said that the European Union is much slower in addressing disinformation. Do you agree with it? And also, my question, if you could also say a few words about Estonian approach to counter disinformation, so we have the whole picture of 3 Baltic countries would be great. Thank you.
Okay, slower than
Baltic countries, I think it was a statement.
Sure, but that's by design, because the EU is a club of 27 countries. So there is no way, no standing chance that a club of 27 is as fast as a club of 3. So it's a fact of life, but yeah, I mean, it couldn't be any other way, honestly. But we can still work with that. And as said, well, due to, I don't want to say thanks to, but due to Russia's war against Ukraine, we have had to pick ourselves up, and really the EU again has I think surprised at least some people in terms of how much we can actually deliver if there is the political will. In terms of Estonia, so I've been away from 1.5 years, so I don't have all the latest details, but maybe a few remarks on the Estonian approach. I was working on this in Tallinn for 3 or so years before coming to Brussels. Estonia very much believes in the, it sounds like a cliche, but we really in Tallinn, we do work with the notion of whole of society approach to addressing Russian information manipulation. What we mean by that is that how it's set up in Estonia, there is one unit that's in the lead, situated within the government office or the cabinet office in the UK's case, the apolitical part of the system that oversees the work done by different ministries, and that one department designs the whole national approach of what we do. There is a very close cooperation between all different ministries pretty much, but also the universities. For example, our biggest university, the oldest one in Tartu, is just designing, for example, a master's level course on well, disinformation and building resilience to that. And the trick there is that up until recently, at least in Estonia, and I don't think much else where in the EU, was there a master's level program that would bring together different parts of different kind of institutes that are needed to understand the problem. So we have strong communications institutes, strong international relations institutes, psychologists, etc. But in order to understand how the Kremlin and several others use information as a tool, as a weapon even, you need more than that. You need to bring together journalists, communicators, international relations experts, IT people, lawyers, psychologists, and so on. And this is exactly what our university is building with the support of the government and some international partners. Estonia is very much working with our NGOs, our education system, media and information literacy was already mentioned. For over 10 years by now, Estonia has had a compulsory course on media and information literacy for high school students. So each and every Estonian language high school student has to take this 35-hour course that explains basically how information works, how media works, but not only legacy media, not only newspapers and the TV, also how social media works. Why does my newsfeed look different from yours? What are algorithms? And sure, 35 hours, it's not a lot, but it's guarantees that, every student at least or pupil has this elementary hygiene level of understanding how the information environment works. And maybe a last point to raise there, I could talk for hours about how great Estonia is, but what we have done since last February is we have also really amped our support to independent Russian language media operating in Estonia, because we believe this is the way to go. In the long term, sure, we need to integrate these people, and this starts from our education system. Our government is moving towards Estonian language only or mainly system. We still have quite a few Russian-speaking schools. I think the trick in the long term is in a unified education system, language-wise, but in the short term, it's a fact of life. We can't just cut people off from information. We can take away the Russian propagandistic sources, but then they will still go somewhere to look for that information. And if they don't speak Estonian, they will look for another source that's possibly even worse than the ones that have been sanctioned. So we have on the government level amped our support to both kind of Russian language public media, but also private media, TV, radios, and newspapers. And I do believe this is a kind of a necessary short-term remedy that we need in reaching those longer-term goals. But yeah, I'll stop here because I don't want to monopolize the